All right, so it's been about a month since I have checked in last, and it's been an interesting month, and I had to just record because I have this beautiful view behind me. And it's been a new adventure into the south side of Mexico City in Tepoztlan. And it's been a very beautiful experience here with pretty mild weather compared to the coastlines of Mexico, which can get pretty hot, obviously, this time of year, being more in the tropics. And life in the realm of software and work has been informally starting my company SaaSworks Grow Tier, which consults for clients that generally are going to go spend about a price point of maybe about $60,000 on offshore talent. And so what SaaSworks does is it brings in starter kits, it provides hiring advisory, technical planning, to basically take all of the risk out of the equation, packaging that for a price point that's a fraction of what the person is trying to spend. And I didn't really expect to informally start out this way, but it's kind of just become that. And I think that's where today's material comes from. So, the biggest takeaway that I have written down is that you will always wind up paying your technical debt. And so what that means is you can have people, and in fact, I had asked in one of the online communities where I spend time, I'd asked, their opinions on how far you can go using ChatGPT in labor across the globe, that really, from a market rate for a software engineer, you can get for about $15 an hour. And so I was truly interested in some of the responses, and we'll see if I can clip some of them or read some of them back to you. But in general, people within the field of software tend to all agree that you do eventually pay any kind of technical debt that's in software. So we could define that. What does technical debt mean? And in the cases that I had discovered, this a lot of the time meant that we're talking about a code base in particular that had many files that had 2,000 or more lines, many instances of duplicate code, not a lot of streamlining between flow of data. And so what I mean by that is, like, you could have a feature or a page within your app, and you could have a different view on a similar set of data. And what this particular code base in question that inspired this had was completely different pathing. So even though the interface looked the same, the structure of the component either used a lot of duplicate code, so someone had clearly gone and copy pasted. There were areas where code was no longer used. Once you went into the API, there was inconsistency in naming, so it became even difficult to try to streamline what was there. And I think that was just the beginning and the start of their problems. There was also what I discovered in the course of looking at this code base was an endpoint that had no protection on it, and that if you hit it, you could create a user that was an admin privileged user. And so this meant that in their production systems, anybody from the public with no authentication could even see in the client code what the signature was of that endpoint, hit that endpoint, and make themselves admin. And this particular customer or client of mine, that will soon be no longer, had brand names that everybody has heard of, which kind of gets to a point that's almost absurd. And we'll dig into some news stories on this just to tie it to industry and current events and all that. So there's this idea of technical debt, whether it's duplicate code. We're talking 2,000 line files with 200 line plus function points with no comments. We're talking inconsistency in format of code, and we're talking like this particular startup had no discernible deployment process. Everything was done by hand. And since my other client account is not only a friend but an active account, and they're just not even in nearly the same state as this other account, it's harder to maybe comment so directly on. But I mean, this particular code base was so bad. I mean, I even saw like places where you could see misspellings of variable names. So someone obviously had just left in the word search, but they spelled it SERCH. So it was bad enough that when this client wanted to renege on a contract we had about a retainer, I basically let them. Once they realized they had breached contract, they obviously came back and sort of let me know that they could stick to the original agreement. But when the code base is that bad, and I think what made it worst of all was this particular person didn't even want to hear that their code base was in such a bad state. So they didn't want to take advice about how they could fix things. They were so committed that they could just hire and fire their way to get what they wanted. They were insistent that the CTO that had left the company, this was maybe an omitted detail in this particular account, the CTO had left the company, and the CEO felt strongly that the CTO knew what they were doing. So it's just very hard to bring a level of professional respect to this type of stuff. But and on my other account, the name of the game is similar. I had advised them for a year or two to bring tests in, and they hadn't done so, and now they're, for one reason or another. And again, it's a very different account. So but the moral is still the same, which is that you will always pay for technical debt. And I think one of the metaphors that I used for my friend's accounts, my other account, is that you're really not finished on any software product until you have tests written. And the reason for that is because there's a surface area of your code is when someone goes to actually use the application, and it's just impossible to have any human being do this, because the human mind is only capable of storing about 8 ideas in their brain simultaneously, usually less than this. And once you start to get in all the different combinations of how software can be used, even with a small group of QA developers checking by hand, it just won't even hold a candle to what automated software testing can do, and having hundreds of tests check your software. I try to tell people it's like having a 100-point check on a car engine. Or I think the other metaphors I found myself using with the other client account to try to get them into the realm of sanity was that it just felt as though I was a construction worker. He had asked me to show up on site to build, but there was just rubble everywhere and there was errors in the construction, and he wanted me to build on top of the construction. And there's unfortunately many garbage code bases out there like this, and you have people that are non-technical that refuse to pay the cost. And so that's a really important fact of the industry, that you will always wind up paying the debt. And in this person's case, they do have noteworthy customers, and so from their perspective, I advised him, like, you're better off, if he's that unwilling to see it, he's better off trying to pay someone $15 an hour that has kind of a junior level confidence and won't be so bothered by messy code, because they're going to write messy code. But when that person winds up breaking things, they would wind up coming back to me anyway, or some other senior level person, and they'll hear the same advice. So it's just, again, ironing to that point of you always pay the technical debt. See what else is on today's agenda. So the other part about this that I'm advising the other client, my friend's company, is you should always try to ship the most minimal product possible. And so there's this game that people play in software development where they offload a lot of their functionality to SaaS because it's much cheaper to offload to SaaS than it is to assure the software. So even if you're paying hundreds or even over $1,000 per month in SaaS, it's oftentimes much cheaper than hiring a developer who will cost much more than $1,000 per month to maintain that software or quality assure it. So I think you always play this game of what's your quickest or cheapest path into market. And this is something that is not a silver bullet, but I think the best and most successful companies that I have found have often had some of their highest leverage processes be non-technical. So instead of using technology to solve the problem, they're using a non-technical process to make it go quicker, and that could be just a good customer support function. It could be on the side of trying to reduce tech cost. It could be trying to whittle down a better MVP and outsourcing to SaaS. But that's also another really important element when building software products, because if you go too large, too many features, and you listen to too many different customer feedbacks, and so you have these little pockets of value and feature across your product, but you don't have a good solid MVP, you're going to have too much that you need to QA. So I think it's important, even though you maybe start out with that lean process to listen to customers, you do need to eventually make your own decisions about where the middle ground of all the customers is, and you always play this game of what's your cheapest path to market, which is not something that's obvious to a lot of people at the outset of trying to build a software business. So another thing that went horribly wrong in this other person's code base is that they had secrets in plain text in GitHub, and this was just something that you should never do. And it's a pretty wild thing to try to educate on, and we will get into some charts about all of this in a little bit, but basically speaking, you should never. Let's go ahead and do that now. We should be, now we're in my screen share. So okay, in general, you want something like Amazon KMS, which will do key rotation. And so the idea if you were to store your keys in GitHub, what that means is that, generally speaking, every time you push a new version, there's a copy of your key in GitHub, which that means that there's 100 different versions of your key out there instead of in one place. And that just means that, for every developer that has, access to your repository, maybe they have access to an old version, but they don't have access to the current version. It just gives you 100 more places every time a version is stored of where your key could get compromised. And then the other side is that, so usually the better method is to have, an encrypted key in one place that you share, from a more secure method that's not a version control. And then the other thing that's really important is this idea of key rotation, which again is kind of what is depicted, or it's what would be provided by something like AWS Key Management Service. And the idea of this is that you're doing key rotation regularly, and so even if you have your keys compromised, if the compromise happens on data that is 6 months old, it's just not going to be as big a deal because you're going to be doing key rotation. Or even if they do compromise and get into the system, the idea is that probably other keys or other secure parts of the system, will be also rotating. So you're greatly improving your security. And I think to also speak to what information should go into a key management service, you absolutely should not have third-party software keys inside your version control. So that means no SendGrid, no Gmail keys, no Stripe payment keys, no third-party application keys whatsoever. So it's unbelievable that that's something that would need commenting on, but it's just not responsible to your customers if you're doing something like this. So what else do we have today in the notes? So I have some stuff in here about remote work right here. I think generally speaking, we want to see people using a tool like Screencastify or Loom is obviously a really popular one. Probably right now it wants me to finish setting up Loom, but these tools are letting you do screencasts, much like you're seeing me do in this video right now, but then to just readily share it with colleagues. And in remote work, we use this all the time. But I think it's good and healthy for me to talk about remote work, because I see all the time. I've seen this now since 2017, and then I started out working remotely. So I know what a good, healthy remote team looks like. And I never quite saw the opportunity to bring that knowledge in to the ecosystem. But in general, my saying became over time that if people aren't communicating, they probably aren't working. Or worse, they could be working on the wrong problem. And so you do see exception to this, where people will they'll go, dark or quiet for hours at a time, and they'll reemerge with the thing done magically that you wanted. And that's always great. But I think, more often than not, if people don't communicate, then they probably aren't working. And I think, when it comes to communication, the good form of communication is doing like a screen share. And it's very obviously basic to talk about, but there's such a difference between, let's say we talk about a text message over an SMS type of application versus a voice memo over the same application. Now you can get the nuance of voice, but listen to it when it's convenient. There's a live phone call, there's a live Zoom call. Zoom call obviously providing something like a screen share, or there's the concept of a Loom or a Screencastify, which gives you the screen share at the convenience to return to, reference later, or just at your convenience. And so these are the types of tools that you just have to have them, when you're working remotely. And in regards to like evaluating like what is a good remote worker versus not, and going into communication, something we did as part of one of these accounts was we did kind of like a round of interviews where we brought in about 10 people and evaluated them. And the best workers are able to work independently to discover solutions, but they're also communicating along the way if they hit blockers. So like one of the beautiful things I saw was that the worker indicated that they were blocked, and then a few hours later came back and said, I fixed it. And so that's sort of saying that I'm blocked, and then if someone is able to then help them, they do, but that person then will also resolve their own issues if they can. It just might take them longer. So giving the team options. I can't believe that some remote work organizations just don't seem to understand this, and they just have workers that hardly show up. I mean, I have been in meetings with large companies, probably strategic accounts, and people don't even show up to the meetings, and it's we've had to like let go of people because they just didn't show up to meetings multiple times. And this has obviously given remote work a bad name. A lot of people took remote work during COVID and thought that it was just a ticket to not work as hard. All right, so what else do we have on today's list? Another small thing is that anytime you have anybody that's talking about like doing a big overhaul to a code base, so it could be like Dockerizing, it could be trying to like add tests or whatever. Sometimes people in the engineering space, they say things like this, and like what they're really doing, and it gets kind of more toxic at the enterprise. The enterprise scale, people will just bring in tools to bring in tools, and they're doing it not even because it achieves a function, but because it gives them, more reason to just slack off at their job. And in a startup, obviously this type of thinking doesn't work, where budgets are just not the same. And so I think the encouragement for any kind of non-technical audience is that any kind of larger scale technology effort always starts with something simple. So if we're talking about CI/CD, you should really be using Visual Code SSH plugin and just SSHing onto the box, rather than anticipating that you're going to have a perfect infrastructure as code set up out of the box, know what all of your bash scripts should be. You have to always be solving these chicken or egg issues. If you're trying to Dockerize, I really think it starts with just a bash script. So you don't want to be sold on these like tens of thousands of dollars initiatives that the person isn't able to break it down for you into smaller steps like this for you. And what else have we got today? So I guess something funny happened on one of my calls, and we had a former sales executive that wanted to take, very much to me, what was a product-led company, and she wanted to bring Grant Cardone into the meeting. And I just don't think Grant Cardone belongs in the world of software at all. And for those of you that don't know, Grant Cardone, you can pull up a photo of this guy. Maybe you've seen him. And yeah, this would be like Grant Cardone, very much like a more Ponzi scheme version of Tony Robbins telling people that like you can get rich quick too. And the idea is that in software, the reason that sales so often is just a bad approach is that unless you're doing some kind of an agency style business, oftentimes like you really are trying to help a customer in their process of using a computer. So these are things that have nothing to do with being sold. And there will always, of course, be longer need for salespeople in software organizations, but it just doesn't hold a candle to what would be called a product-led approach. So if we look at like maybe what a product-led approach would be, I guess I found this website called productled.org, but there's a great book called Product-Led Growth I can recommend, which is this book right here. And it talks about like different use cases and studies about, let's see if we can find the Amazon link. Use cases and studies about, how companies like Slack, basically try to measure that a user is successfully onboarded or not. And then I think, we can look at a chart like this about how you take people that don't know your product. You want to get them exploring in your product, and you want to get them proficiently using your product. So, if we think of some examples out in the world, you look at something like Adobe Photoshop, which is just a massively complex piece of software. But of course, people have to actually get in there and play around with it to learn it. And obviously taking courses and doing trainings is like a very enterprisey kind of way to do it. And obviously people do self-learning on the internet, and so having tools with your software like knowledge bases is of course helpful. We were talking about how Intercom has this feature, which we can kind of go find, knowledge base integration, Intercom, and you can basically generate chatbots from your knowledge base. So not only do you have something that's searchable, but you're able to, with a tool like Intercom, just generate good experiences to help answer customer inquiries. And so this would be part of the product-led initiative, and let's see what else we can kind of come up with on this. I think I had the Amazon book right here. So, this is all stuff that is good for, building an actual product that people have to use. And the way that you do a business strategy for that, again, you have to reduce your scope of software that you're supporting, have a really minimal MVP. And something else that I think is not super obvious to start with. So if we look at a company like HubSpot, everybody, would market on the internet that HubSpot is free to start with, but it's just what everybody then finds out. And this is also, by the way, this is the same, if we were to go look at like Wix as a website builder. So if someone's like trying to start a small business website, Wix is free to start. If we look at HubSpot, it's free to start. And the other one that comes to mind is Shopify, free to start. But like once you start to dig into these tools, especially with something like HubSpot, it becomes massively expensive. And the idea is that most of these customers, they wind up spending like $300 a month when, initially they said that they were going to get something for free. So that kind of sales side is just one part of it. The other part that's like super or truly important is that you're giving the user a free experience so they can get into your tool and create buy-in with their own, loading their data in, getting proficient in using it, and you're giving them some free value in exchange. So they're paying the cost to you to just learn your software, and so having it introduced at a very low cost is much easier for that customer to perform that learning rather than having a very heavy all-at-once approach. And obviously this works for all parts of life where we want to take a big problem, we want to break it down into steps. So it could be whether it's that Dockerization journey that I talked about, or just trying to get users working with a technical product. So that's all stuff that is pretty important. And I guess if we kind of just touch base briefly on, I had mentioned earlier in this video, this idea of not having plain text secrets in your repository. This is a real security bulletin that went out, because there's basically, and this was rather recent, but this is basically indicating that let's make sure we're on screen share, huh? Where were we? Oh, we lost the page right here. This one's indicating that basically, there were malicious NPM scripts that were designed to try to snuff through the local file system to grab secrets. So that means if you had anywhere in your file system, and sometimes what happens is, like, even developers will have, they'll not commit the secret into GitHub, which is better, but they still will have it sitting in plain text somewhere. It could be an env file that just maps to the system environment. So, and these are things that obviously, like, on some level, it's kind of hard to prevent, the environment variables getting dumped to a third-party server. But if you have something like key rotation, that does seem to help. And let's see if I've missed anything else on today's vlog. So I'm thinking that is probably it. The only other thing that I really wrote down is that, I think that the two things that I'm not sure where they've landed in the recent world of software and consulting adventures is just that it's not always money that's most important. And maybe this comes from, like, having worked with people that maybe make quite a bit of money, but they feel kind of like a stress in their lives, and the money can become something that they then have to manage. So I think freedom is maybe the ultimate currency, is one remark. And I think then the other is just that when it comes to people saying working smarter, not harder, I think that that's true, but I have seen my fair share of people saying that and then using that as an excuse to maybe work to a level of laziness that is, like, borderline lying to your employer or fraudulent. So I think it's also about one of these things that they don't tell you. It's about how can you also be cheaper and faster as well, which means just, like, as you go in your day-to-day, picking out the most productive things that you can do today. And I think that's going to make you effective. These could be lessons for software, these could be lessons for life. But I had to film today because, the backdrop here is just outstandingly beautiful. And we can do a little bit of a look around before cutting it. But yeah, it's truly just hugged by the mountains and all of the greenery. And so I had to just do something that showed it all off. And yeah, today's video is obviously a bit long, captured notes. Things have been quite busy lately, but there's plenty of opportunities to have succinct videos in the future. But until next time, like and subscribe.